Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
First of all today, Brexit has dominated the weekend's agenda again as cabinet members and ministers took to the airwaves to discuss the future customs arrangement with the EU. A week after Boris Johnson labelled the customs partnership option crazy, Michael Gove appeared on Mar and had this to say when asked whether he agreed with the Foreign Secretary.
You ask about Boris's comments on the new customs partnership. In the interview that Boris gave to the Daily Mail, he pointed out some of the flaws with the new customs partnership. And across government, across cabinet, there is agreement that neither of these two models is absolutely perfect. And with the new customs partnership, Boris pointed out that because it's novel, because no model like this exists, there have to be significant question marks over the deliverability of it on time.
Well, that was Michael Gove. Let's talk to the two journalists. Good morning to both of you, or good afternoon now, and it's still sunny. Jessica Elgott and Christopher Hope. Who said what at the weekend, Jessica?
So the first person out of the traps on Sunday was Michael Gove, and he was asked about, as you said in your introduction, this idea that the customs partnership might be crazy, as Boris Johnson said. And he didn't disagree. He said that he thought that the customs partnership had some serious flaws, but he's also said that all cabinet members agreed that there were flaws in both the different customs union proposals that there were on the table. But he also said something else quite interesting, which is that about the max FAC option, the technological option for dealing with the border, that he wouldn't think that it was worth delaying Brexit or delaying the transition period in order for that new technology to come into force on the border. That's something that some Tory MPs have suggested could be an option. So that was quite interesting to hear him talk about the flaws on both sides, but he certainly was more critical of the other option, the customs partnership one.
So does it change anything? Where are we now, Chris?
Well, I think we're sort of heading towards a hybrid option, a third way, if you like. I'm sure the Guardian might agree with that. Somewhat combination of the new customs partnership and this max FAC model, which will allow no one to resign. Don't forget, you've got these two entrenched positions. Philip Hammond in favour of the NCP, the new customs partnership. On the other side, you've got Boris Johnson and Michael Gove this weekend coming out for the max FAC option. And you've got Damien Green saying we need to have a longer transition period after 2020 to get the whole thing in order. I think it's going to be that's what she wants to get to. Theresa May is going to build a consensus and try and they'll come out with some third model which will allow everyone to save face and move on into the June Council when all this must be decided.
Right, Jessica, do you agree there'll be consensus, there won't be any resignations, that somehow everybody will be brought on board and get behind one agreement?
I think it's the most likely option, but at the moment the Prime Minister's strategy just seems to be to keep putting off that moment where she comes up with whatever solution that might be. I think one of the interesting people to watch that has been over the sort of past 24 hours has been the Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt. He's not part of this inner Brexit war cabinet, if you like, but he came out on Sunday saying, he was asked if he was one of 12 cabinet ministers prepared to block the customs partnership options, and he said that the person that he was backing was the Prime Minister, and we understand that her preferred option is the customs partnership. So, and also then he came out again today and said, it was asked about whether Boris Johnson should perhaps keep his opinions to himself a bit more, or at least just keep them around the cabinet table rather than in the newspapers. And he suggested that he agreed with that analysis. So it'll be interesting to see how much influence other cabinet ministers start having to have on this debate.
Well, and that's the cabinet, and I never thought I'd hear myself talk about customs partnership and customs arrangement in so much detail over so many months, but there you go. That's the cabinet. What about Parliament, Chris? What are the parliamentary hurdles ahead?
There's quite a few. Well, in the short term, Theresa May will meet with senior Brexiteers today to try and work out how they can help to get a degree of unanimity across the entire Conservative Party. But there are all sorts of hurdles. There's 13 or 14 Lords amendments pushed through just recently, which the government's going to have to work out how to overturn. And I think if you look at last week's vote on Leveson, there are numbers there on key votes that the government could win. It just seems the whips are a bit nervous about relying on their DUP friends to get things through Parliament, but I expect them to try and ram all of those laws amendments through in one go, which will become an effective vote of confidence in the government. Not a literal one, but an effective sort of test for the government of whether it can control Parliament and deliver Brexit.
Right, and Jessica, timings. Everybody talks about the clock ticking, or Michel Barnier particularly talks about the clock ticking. I mean, is there any sense that that timetable is going to be bust?
Well, there is certainly an awful lot of time-dependent legislation that the government needs to get through, not just to get a decision before this June council, but also before MPs have to vote on the final on the final deal. So there's there's lots of different things like the immigration bill, the EU withdrawal bill, which is the one that Chris was talking about, the trade bill, the customs bill. All of these have potentially significant hurdles from Remain backing MPs on both sides, including the Labour front bench, which the Prime Minister is going to have to overcome. So there's many more parliamentary battles to come before the final deal is sealed.
Jessica and Chris, thank you both very much. Well, talking about Parliament, this morning in Essex there was a cross-party bid to prevent a hard Brexit as David Miliband, Nicky Morgan and Nick Clegg banded together to urge Parliament against such a thing. Nick Clegg joins us now with an interesting backdrop. Hello to you, Nick. Thanks for joining us. It's all right, you're the main focus here for the interview. What is the point of your intervention at this stage?
Well, I think because the government itself, as you've just been discussing, is in such a state of internal gridlock, given that the clock is ticking, we really are now reaching the kind of final stages of the Article 50 negotiations, and given the absence of any strategic direction for the country, I think Nicky and David Miliband and myself all felt that it was worthwhile on a cross-party basis to signal loud and clear that MPs in the crucial months ahead, because all the key votes will come to the fore in the coming months, really should put country before party. These are very unusual votes, the likes of which I certainly cannot remember in the time I've been in politics, because they will have such a determining effect on so many aspects of our nation's life for years and years ahead. So I think the message really was to seek to embolden folk to put country before party. Right.
Do you think they need your help and assistance to do that, Nick Clegg? I mean, what's the sort of best case scenario in your view in terms of Parliament's actions?
Well, if you ask me personally, I think this is becoming so contorted and the divisions are becoming so great and the technical complexities are becoming so intractable that in the end the best thing to do will be to have a people's vote on the final deal and let the people decide, not the politicians. That would be, in answer to your question, in my view, the best outcome in the end. But in the meantime, MPs need to discharge their duties, scrutinise what the government puts before them, and there's an immense amount of sort of pressure for MPs to do what the whips tell them to do, what, I don't know, whatever the most vituperative newspapers tell them to do. And I think our message is, look, just take a calm look at the things before you and make sure that you put your constituents first and act with your conscience and act in the nation's interest, not in the interests of the political parties. Because as you know, the two major political parties are in the very strange situation of having two leaderships in Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn who don't really seem to know whether they're coming or going on this most vital of issues.
Yeah, but why should anyone listen to you, Nick Clegg, with the deepest of respect? Parliamentarians know what their job is, and they're there to represent their constituents and obviously execute their own personal views, no doubt, when it comes to this issue. Why listen to you?
Well, they don't need to. No one. It's a free country. I can speak when I wish to, and people can block up their ears when they wish to. It's not a question of whether people have to listen. No, they can listen whether they want to or not. But David Miliband, myself and Nicky Morgan, if from different points of view, have a fair amount of experience in and out of government over quite some time, and all of us feel very strongly, if from different political traditions, that this is being very badly mishandled by the government, very badly mishandled by the principal party of opposition. Frankly, people like me or David Miliband, I suspect Nicky Morgan, she's being an MP, is in a different situation, wouldn't really feel inclined to speak out if there was any meaningful leadership being exercised by the leaders of the Conservative and Labour parties at the moment. But in the absence of that, because there's this great void now in British politics, I think we're just expressing our opinions about what should happen next, but whether people listen or not is entirely up to them.
I mean, what makes you think that this intervention will work? I mean, surely you've come together on the basis that you think it will have an impact on parliamentarians. I mean, if you remember during the referendum campaign, in fact, I think we can show our viewers a picture of George Osborne, Ed Balls and Vince Cable doing something very similar. And of course, it didn't work. Vince Cable and Ed Balls weren't MPs then either. A little like you and David Miliband, George Osborne obviously was. So there's no evidence it worked then. Why would it work now?
Well, look, I mean, we're not silly. We don't think that one event in Raynham on a Monday morning is going to change British politics, for heaven's sake. We just think that there is an important point to be made on a cross-party basis, that in the absence of leadership from either Jeremy Corbyn and Theresa May, in the absence of any strategic direction from the government, in the absence of any sense of momentum in these crucial talks, and in the absence of any clarity about what the long-term future of our country is, we felt like coming together and saying, look, if no one else is going to make any decisions, then MPs will have to grasp this with both hands, act in good conscience about what they think is right for the country in the long term, ignore the short-term pressures from their whips, ignore the short-term hysteria from the newspapers, do what you think is right. It's incidentally the same reason why John Major has separately, and in my view rightly, said that in an ideal world, these things should be the subject of a free vote in Parliament.
Nick Clegg, thank you very much. Well, the Conservative MEP and long-standing Brexit campaigner Daniel Hannan is here with us in the studio. Just before I come to you, do you welcome that intervention from Nick Clegg, David Miliband and Nicky Morgan?
No, I mean, not particularly. I
not?
I like Nick Clegg a lot. I don't really know David Miliband. I love Nicky Morgan, obviously, but I think the tone of your questioning, there was a subtext of, talk about has-beens. I'm not sure it's going to move the dial on Brexit and the whole debate about how we do Brexit. It is up to, indeed, as Matthew Parris wrote in the Times on Saturday, it's up to MPs in Parliament to stand up for what they believe and to make the right steps in terms of how Brexit should be shaped in the absence of a clear direction from government.
But ostensibly you agree with him, don't you?
Well, I mean, I agree that, I don't know what exactly he's proposing. I've made it quite clear that there are certain issues like the customs union that I think we need to have a proper debate on. I'm sure when Daniel speaks, we'll get our teeth into how Brexit is going to emerge. For me, I want a Brexit that doesn't cost jobs and doesn't harm the economy as little as possible.
Right. How do you think the Brexit process is going, Dan?
Well, first of all, I mean, let's all agree that Nick is right that MPs should put their country first, and if they don't do that, they will be asking themselves some hard questions about why they're MPs. So we're all trying to get the best outcome here. Let's take that as read. How do we maximise the opportunities now? Well, actually, it's a fairly technical issue before us. How do we have the most frictionless trade with the EU while allowing us to take advantage of the growing markets further afield, which will account for 90% of the growth in this centre?
Do you think the customs partnership is the answer?
Well, I mean, I don't have, and neither do you, and neither did Caroline or Ed, all the details that the Cabinet Subcommittee have.
Broadly...
But the basic idea that we should try and have, within the context of being able to do our own free trade agreements that allow us to suit ourselves and do services, the closest relationship with our European allies, I hope that that's a common starting point for all sides.
Right. So you don't think that the customs partnership would work in its current form, the way it's been presented?
Well, I was initially very attracted by the idea when I saw it floated last August. The problem seems to be a quite technical one, that it's just not going to be up and running in time to make it work. Would
you support a customs partnership when it comes to the Commons, or is it crazy, like Boris Johnson says?
I would support some kind of compromise, which is what, to a certain extent, people are talking about. So, I start on the position that the customs union is the best thing for our economy. And I profoundly disagree with Dan. This is where I really get quite militant about it, because I don't believe, A, that free trade deals are around the corner, and if they are, they will involve things that the British people are going to find quite hard to stomach. For example, we've heard that Turkey wants to do a free trade deal, but it involves free movement between Turkey and the UK. Now, people can take a view on that. Secondly, I don't believe that we are stopped from trading. Germany trades happily with China. We send trade missions to India. Matt Hancock's in India.
From doing our trade deals. Ed, why is it? Why do you think that no one in Norway, no one in Switzerland, none of the parties in those EFTA countries, the countries that are closest to the EU, want to join the customs union and surrender their ability to do their own trade deals?
But this is the other problem I have, which is that the Brexiteers say you can't possibly consider the customs union because we need a clean Brexit, but you want to be part of the single market. So why is it okay for you to say, well, in the interest of our economy, let's join the single market, but in the interest of Brexit, let's not be a member of the customs union?
Well, no, it's not in the interest of Brexit. The customs union was always the most harmful aspect of our membership. We are a very unusual EU country because we sell more outside the EU than to it. We've always been uniquely penalised by it. As recently as January, the Labour leader was making the very obvious point that it's also harmful because it is protectionist against developing countries and it hurts the poorest people here. It pushes up food bills and clothing bills for the people who have to spend the highest percentage of their income on those basic commodities. It is an immoral and inefficient system.
Right, so you would rather stay in the single market and come out of the customs union in the way that you've articulated. I mean, Caroline Flint, you've previously said that Parliament should reject Brexit game playing and accept the country's decision. Was it, in your mind, the country's decision to leave both the customs union and the single market?
I think they were on the table during the referendum campaign. I can remember myself, campaigning for Remain and going through what this would mean. And whilst I wouldn't say that, as with any referendum, the details of anything were all out there for people, I think people knew that there were big choices to be made. But I've always felt, since the referendum, you divide into two camps. One who actually accepts that we are leaving, and therefore we've got to work through these difficult issues to come out with the best deal. And two, Nick Clegg, who actually wants to overturn the result of the referendum. And therefore, when they get together like this, and I can't speak for David and Nicky, but certainly Nick Clegg in terms of what he's said on the public record, he cannot really win the public's trust because he actually disavows the public's decision in terms of leaving the European Union. So whatever he says, it's all, I think the same sort of arrogance and establishment speak that actually fundamentally lost the Remain campaign.
Do you think Labour is right, then, to get behind remaining in a customs union or on the customs union, according to Emily Thornberry?
Well, what Labour has said is it wants to have a relationship, a strong relationship with the single market and a customs union partnership. In some respects, actually, and it's difficult to weigh this up because it's so unclear from Cabinet and from Theresa May the direction they're going.
Would you support a customs partnership? Would you support that sort of...
Look, I think there's going to be some sort of bespoke deal. Norway got a deal because actually they wouldn't join the European Union.
But they're not in the customs union and they are in the single market.
No, exactly. So they will have to... But the truth is also, Joe, we are not Norway. Norway's a much smaller country, a very different economy. So we're going to have to come up with something that meets our needs. But let's not kid ourselves that everything can stay the same as we leave the European Union.
As much ahead to the EU as we do. Switzerland 5 times as much. Neither of them wants to join the customs union.
All right, but on your point about the single market, Dan, do you think those 83 Labour peers who backed the idea of the UK staying inside the European Economic Area, do you think they went too far or they were right?
I don't believe you can stay in the single market and and have the changes to freedom of movement. I just can't see the EU agreeing to that, and I accept that principle. So we're going to have to come up with something that, as much as possible, protects some of the advantages, but it won't be the same. But the other side of it is, Joe, and, I don't want to be too sort of like, it's all going to be great, because it's not. These are challenging issues. But part of our discussion in the next year has to be about the sort of things we'll do differently outside the EU in terms of our desperate, because there'll be no place to hide in the future behind blaming the EU for all our ills when it comes to our productivity, our lack of skills, our lack of people able to go into the jobs where there are shortages.
But, Ed Vaizey, do you think it is helpful when you have Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary, dismissing one of the key planks or proposals by the Prime Minister, dismissing those as crazy, or that colleagues who believe in remaining in the customs union, perhaps like yourself, are accused of plunging the knife into the Prime Minister?
No, I don't think it's helpful at all. I mean, just on Caroline's earlier point, I would say that I confidently predict for the next 30 years, Brexiteers will still be blaming Europe for whatever happens to our economy in the next 30 years. But as I say, all of those, we all accept that we're leaving the European Union. What drives me nuts, if you like, is the ideological approach to our leaving. I want practical solutions, as I say, that will protect jobs and protect the economy. And we're told that there are red lines.
Something you happen to disagree with. The only country that is in a customs union with the EU and not in the EU is Turkey. Turkey hates it, and with good reason, because as Labour's trade spokesman Barry Gardiner said on this programme, Turkey being in a customs union with the EU means that if the EU does a trade deal with somebody else, with South Korea, then Turkey has to mimic everything the EU does, but South Korea only has to reciprocate to the EU, not to Turkey. In other words, what you're saying would leave us as a bargaining chip for the Brussels negotiators to use for the benefit of the remaining 27. Now, how can you portray that as being a sort of practical, undogmatic position?
Because I don't agree with your analysis that by leaving the customs union, and I'm not saying that we should stay in the customs union forever, but in the absence of an alternative for our economy, I do not believe, first of all, that we will sign free trade deals straight after we leave the European Union. I think they are many, many years away. Secondly, I think those free trade deals will come with add-ons that the British public will find unacceptable. And thirdly, I'm not sure how much difference they will make to our economy.
We're not going to sign any if we're in the customs union. We won't be allowed to.
But in some respects, we're all trying to look into a crystal ball about the future. Yeah. Of course, there's going to be complications. Of course, there won't be like trade deals straight after.
And would they be ready anyway? I mean, would we be in a position to be ready?
And let's not forget, the EU has spent years trying to get trade deals together. But it comes back to public trust about what people felt was happening.
You can do them quickly. Australia and the US, 7 months.
Sorry, Dan.
Right, I'm going to come to you in a second.
It is about public trust, and it is about recognising that there's going to have to be compromise on all sides to get to where we need to go. But we need leadership.
Right.
Theresa May.
And on that, has there been a lack of leadership? I mean, do you think it's a good idea, this working party, these two groups of mixing up Remainers and Brexiteers within the cabinet to discuss these two proposals?
Well, the problem is that Parliament has become effectively a negotiator, and of course that leaves us in a weaker position because there isn't a majority in Parliament to deliver the referendum result, and of course they know that in Brussels, so they have no incentive to talk seriously to us as long as they think that the Remainers in the House of Lords and the House of Commons will do their work for them by keeping us in a customs union, paying our tariff income to Brussels and agreeing without any say.
Supposed to do in Parliament? Isn't that what parliamentarians are supposed to do? Scrutinise proposals and legislation in the best way they think possible. They might also have
if that was what they were doing, no one would have a problem with it.
What are they
doing?
But
I come back to what Barry Gardiner said when he set out what was wrong with the customs union. That is an unarguable position. Labour then saw an opportunity to inflict some damage on the government, and they decided to back a preposterous compromise, which, not in the interest of getting a better Brexit, but in the interest of trying to discomfort the government. And I don't think that is a strong negotiating position for us to be in as a country.
Where does it end? What does the Prime Minister have to do now?
Well, I think we can find a way through on a customs deal. Remember that the backstop is we've said we're not going to put any infrastructure up on our side of the border. We should repeat that. Obviously, we should be prepared to work with the Irish Republic on helping them not put any on their side. But ultimately, that's their call.
What is the way through in terms of Parliament now?
Well, ultimately, if Parliament insists on staying in the customs union, then we are plainly worse off than we are now. Leaving the EU, but staying in the customs union, in other words, putting Brussels in charge of 100% of our trade policy with 0% input, that would be worse than we are now. In that situation, I think you'd need to have a new mandate, either in the form of a general election or of another referendum.
Do you agree, yes or no?
No, I think there will be a arrangement that comes to that is unique to the UK and the EU.
Do you think in the end that she's going to have to go to the country, or she's going to have to somehow put forward a challenge to back her?
No, I don't think that's not in my thinking that we would have an election or a referendum, but it is in my thinking that Theresa May is perfectly capable of putting forward what she believes is the right form of Brexit and asking Parliament to vote on it.
All right, thank you very much, Dan Hannan.
There's been no significant progress in Brexit negotiations since March, according to the EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier. The issue of the Irish border and the customs arrangement remains a key stumbling block. Today, Theresa May met backbench MPs at Downing Street to explain the government's ideas for dealing with the problem. Our political editor, Laura Koonsberg, reports.
Trying to get her own side on side.
I'm always reassured when I meet the Prime Minister.
Theresa May summoning all Tory MPs to number 10.
She was in very good form.
As she fights on many fronts. A cabinet that can't agree what to do about customs after Brexit.
If you disagree with the Prime Minister on this issue so fundamentally, why do you lack the courage to resign?
As I say, I think that the Prime Minister's position that I've now twice applauded is completely right.
And Parliament, that on many sides doesn't much like her plans.
Parliament will have to step up to the plate on this one because ministers have such differing and irreconcilable views.
Unable to agree amongst themselves, the Tories can't crack on with this element of Brexit, while those whose lives could be most affected can only watch on and worry.
All the political complexities are about a simple question. On the right of the bridge is the UK, On the left is Ireland. Next year, that becomes a border of the European Union too. Last weekend, at a traditional tractor run in the north, we heard fears and frustration about how that could change life here.
That's what a lot of people are worried about, is the fact that it is so uncertain and nobody seems to know what's going on. I don't think they really know either.
I prefer myself with no border, because we had borders, say, maybe 30 years ago.
Ministers say there won't be a hard border, but not how they'll prevent it. And at a weekend match, there are real concerns.
I need to go up and down every day anyway. So I don't want to see no checkpoints or nothing else.
We have enough bother between unionists and nationalists as it goes. So I think this is just making it worse.
No agreement on Ireland is one of the reasons the talks might fail, said the EU chief negotiator. How much progress has there really been before the next vital summit in June?
I would say little, not very little. Nobody must have to underestimate the key rendezvous of June. Huh?
Number 10 says they'll reach a customs position speedily. But with the Prime Minister trying to persuade so many parties, can she really have it all? Laura Kunsberg, BBC News.
Succession of backbench MPs went in and out of Downing Street today as Theresa May attempts to stop her party's infighting over Brexit. Officials have been explaining the pros and the cons of the two customs options that have split the cabinet. There was some consensus, but that was between those opposed to a hard Brexit in different parties. Nicky Morgan, Nick Clegg and David Miliband say the country is being held to ransom by vocal Brexiteers. In a moment, we'll hear from Mr. Miliband, but first, our political correspondent Michael Crick has this.
For much of today, Tory backbenchers have been in and out of the Brexit department at 9 Downing Street for briefings from both the PM and her chief advisor Gavin Barwell on the big issue right now, the two options for Britain's future customs dealings with the EU. This has been a big operation in 9 Downing Street today. 5 sessions, more than an hour each session involving a cross-section of backbench MPs. The Prime Minister and her Chief of Staff both stressing the need to reach a speedy conclusion, but also a recognition that the two options require a lot more work and that neither option is going to be especially easy to deliver.
What did the Prime Minister have to say?
One option, a new customs partnership, would mean Britain collecting tariffs on behalf of the EU. The other, Max FAC, would mean new technology tracking customs movements. Both are complex. It was like visiting a price comparison website, said this MP.
I think it's a process, actually, and what the Prime Minister's done is quite smart in as much as she's taken the protagonists, as it were, on both sides in the cabinet and said, actually, these issues aren't simple. So you go on separate committees to actually crunch through the detail.
Things are urgent. Today, the Bulgarian foreign minister revealed the EU negotiator has warned almost nothing's happened in the 8 weeks since the March summit, while her German counterpart said Britain had no clear position. Boris Johnson claimed, though, he and Mrs May aren't at odds.
What we need to do is, as she said, come out of the customs union in such a way as to enable us to have frictionless trade, no hard border in Northern Ireland, but to do unhindered, unimpeded, free trade deals with the rest of the world. We think that's possible, she thinks that's possible, so that's the way forward.
Meanwhile, this rice factory in Essex saw remarkable cross-party unity today between 3 anti-Brexiteer ex-ministers, 2 of them no longer MPs. Labour's David Miliband and Lib Dem Nick Clegg, and Conservative Nicky Morgan, who urged colleagues to take control of Brexit in the upcoming vote on staying within a customs union.
So the vote has to be a moment for MPs on all sides of the Commons to do what we should do in a representative democracy. On a matter of this importance, act in the national interest.
Might this event lead to a new centre party? Miliband and Clegg seem itching to come back into politics. With their respective pasts on Iraq and student fees, though, that may prove hard.
Well, I caught up with David Miliband after the event and started by asking him if it was a bit presumptuous of him to swan over from the US, where he has his day job, and meddle in Brexit, something 17 million people voted for.
Well, I'm not swanning from anywhere and I'm not meddling from anywhere. I'm giving my own views about the very serious state of the UK position as the clock is ticking down on the most vital national decisions, more important even than general elections, that we've had to take really since the end of the Second World War. And I think that the idea that there should be a conspiracy of silence, that no one's allowed to speak about the appalling situation in which the UK finds itself, no negotiating position on trading relationship, no negotiating positions on the regulation of goods, no negotiating position on the Irish border question.
I mean, you're using this very apocalyptic language. It reminds me very much of Project Fear, and that didn't go very well last time, did it?
No, that is just an attempt to silence discussion. We're at the moment being held hostage by a vision of hard Brexit that is based on the delusion that Britain is going to be able to sail on the open seas of global trade when they are very choppy waters indeed.
Well, is that a delusion, though? I mean, the economist Professor Mintham, for example, says that leaving the customs union and establishing free trade agreements would have a beneficial
effect on
effect on
Well, first of all, it's a delusion
UK
because
GDP.
I can tell you, President Trump drives a hard bargain, and the idea that he's waiting there to open up American markets to British goods in a way they haven't been to European goods is fanciful.
So this is why, for you, today really boils down to a battle to keep Britain in the single market and the customs union, correct?
Yeah.
Jeremy Corbyn, Labour leader, you're still a member of the Labour Party, he's refusing to back keeping the UK in the single market. Why do you think he's taken that position?
Well, I'm honestly baffled, because he says he cares about workers' rights, and the single market underpins them. He says he cares about environmental standards, the single market underpins them. When the European Economic Area offers the guarantees on workers' rights, the guarantees on the environment, never mind the economic guarantees that are offered. And I think that the danger for him and the danger for Britain is that Jeremy Corbyn becomes the midwife of hard Brexit.
Well, isn't he actually the daddy of hard Brexit? Because, I mean, you know, rather than just the
daddy is
midwife.
probably, I think David Cameron claims paternity on this because it was him who called the referendum. You can't blame Jeremy Corbyn for calling the referendum.
But my point is that he's actually a Brexiteer. Is that really the case?
Well, he says he voted against.
And if there was a commitment to a people's vote, as you put it, a second referendum, what role would you commit now to playing in that?
I'd certainly want to be an active participant in that. But this isn't
Leading
about...
it?
No, this isn't about me pushing myself forward.
We saw the three of you on the platform this morning. Is that the prelude to something potentially bigger that could be, you know, a new realignment of politics?
No, I don't think so. I think it's about today's issues, a cross-party alliance, I suppose, or a cross-party cooperation, people from three parties. And the clue is in the name, cross-party. It's not new party. And so I think it's really important that people take the right message out of this, which is that serious people are seriously concerned.
Have you had any conversations with any MPs about the formation of a new party? Those conversations are going on. Have you?
No,
been
they're
party
happening
to
amongst
any of them?
MPs, they're not happening with me.
And do you absolutely rule out re-entering British politics?
I am.
There's a seat going in Lewisham.
I think it's an all-women shortlist, actually. I am always clear to say what I am ruling in, not what I'm ruling out.
See, that answer will leave people thinking that your ambitions to one day lead the Labour Party remain somewhere.
No, look, I had my shot. That's not what this is about.
David Miliband, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.